Well, guys, this is going to be a controversial topic today. We are talking about Drew Lock. I know a lot of you have nothing good to say about the guy. You guys think that he's been bottom of the barrel in the NFL thus far, but maybe I could take a spin in a different direction that you might appreciate. My name's Dante. I am the host of the East Coast Gridiron Podcast, and this is a segment that I like to call The Handoff. Today, we're going to be comparing a prolific career in Drew Brees to the other Drew that's been at the bottom of the barrel in Drew Lock. Hopefully you can come out of this video as a more informed football fan because of this, and maybe you might turn a new leaf for Drew Lock. I don't know. I'm just here to give you a different spin on this whole situation. Trivia time. Anybody out there know Drew Lock's actual name? I'll give you a second to think about that. Drew Lock's actual name is Paul Andrew Lock. Isn't that hilarious? So that's neither here nor there. So when we kind of go and project the numbers of where Drew Lock is right now in his 3-year career to the first 3 years of Drew Brees' career when he was with the Chargers, I think you're going to find some interesting similarities. So here we go. Let's just break it down by how many games that they've actually played. By this time in Drew Brees' career, he's played 28 games to Drew Lock's 24. Now we know Drew Lock kind of had the Drew Lock kind of had come in and start a game, be out the next game, bring some more quarterbacks in to kind of replace Drew Lock. So you got to take that to account too. When Drew Brees was in San Diego, when they were the San Diego Chargers at the time, he did have Doug Flutie there for most of those years that he was there as his backup. Say what you want about Doug Flutie, is what it is. Games started. Drew Lock has only started 21 games up to this point to Drew Brees is 27. Now, when we look at the quarterback records in tandem, Drew Lock is 8-13 in his career. Drew Brees is 21-21 in his career up to this point so far. Now let's get into what you guys really came for. Here's the interesting numbers of both of their careers, okay? So the yardage that they had, Drew Lock has 4,700 yards to when Drew Brees had 5,600 yards. The completion percentage is what's crazy here. Drew Brees was not the most accurate quarterback when he was playing with San Diego. He had a 58% completion percentage to Drew Lock's 59.3, which is kind of wild when you really think about it. At the end of the day, we're really not used to not seeing Drew Brees be an accurate quarterback and be successful, but hey, that's by the numbers. Their attempts was a little lopsided. Drew Lock has only had 710 attempts to Drew Brees' 909. And now when you talk about the touchdown to interception ratio, you have Drew Lock with 25 touchdowns to his 20 interceptions to Drew Brees' 29 touchdowns and his 31 interceptions. How many of you guys could have guessed that Drew Brees in his first 3 years threw more interceptions than he threw touchdowns? Now we're talking about a first ballot Hall of Famer who I think is the best quarterback of all time, but I digress. So when you start looking at these type of things, man, and even in his first 3 years, Drew Lock has had a longer pass completion than 92 yards than Drew Brees had, which his longest was 68 at the time. So I'm not sure if I'd have to dig deeper into the numbers, but Drew Brees did have a couple good receivers, which we'll get into a little bit later. First downs. I think that this is a very telling stat for a couple of different reasons, and I'll let you guys interpret that how you want to. Drew Lock has had 231 first downs to Drew Brees' 269. Granted, he was a starter for most of those games. Could that be a little inflated if Drew Lock was to come in those games? If you really take out those little intricacies, I think that they would be closer. Either Drew Lock would be more by his projected game start to games played ratio. Now here's the other thing, that it's a little close on paper, but I think you would have to say in his career thus far, and it could be because of how, and you're going to see how bad kind of the Broncos offensive line has been throughout the years, but protecting him, Drew Lock has had more rushing touchdowns than Drew Brees did at that point in time. And I know we're comparing a guy that played in the early 2000s to a guy that's playing in the 2020s, but I feel like it's still important that Drew Lock is can be a weapon on the ground. He's already had 285 yards thus far in his career with 5 touchdowns to Drew Brees' 232 yards and 1 touchdown. So take it how you want to there. I just thought that was kind of an interesting stat when you really look at it. Now, if we're comparing year to year and who these quarterbacks had and what their statistics were, I think you could start making the case that Drew Brees had a lot more help and should have put up better numbers than what Drew Lock has had. Phillip Lindsay, where is he at right now? Exactly. Hasn't been on the Broncos, was a Houston Texan at one point, and has kind of been a journeyman thus far in his career. But that's neither here nor there. In 2019, Phillip Lindsay was one of those darling childs that came in and was kind of a Denver hero. He had 1,011 yards and 7 touchdowns. Cortland Sutton, before the injury the following year, had 1,112 yards and 6 touchdowns. Now let's go ahead and head over to the Chargers. If you remember back in the day, LaDainian Tomlinson was a beast. He had 1,200 yards and 10 touchdowns. And Curtis Conway, how many people actually remember Curtis Conway? 1,125 yards and 6 touchdowns. So if you really look at it, a little similar. The Chargers had more touchdowns and more yardage, but Drew Brees didn't play a lot in his first year. Drew Lock did play more. You can kind of see the kind of team that was there. And maybe you can make the case for the 2019 Denver team and the 2001 Chargers team. If Drew Lock would have played, if Drew Brees would have played more games, this would not even be a question. Now let's head over to when they were the projected starters for their team and with the weapons that they had. And the 2020 Denver Broncos, they had Melvin Gordon came over, have a 2-headed monster with Phillip Lindsay. Phillip Lindsay kind of took a step back that year. Melvin Gordon did have 986 yards and 9 touchdowns. Nothing to scoff at whatsoever, was a touchdown machine for them. Jerry Jeudy, this was his rookie year, had 856 yards and 3 touchdowns. Now, I know that they had a couple other players too, and Cortland Sutton was hurt for most of the year, so take that with a grain of salt. In 2002 with the Chargers, they did have LaDainian Tomlinson, who did put up 1,600 yards, 14 touchdowns, with Curtis Conway putting up 152 yards and 5 touchdowns. Now, that's a lot of help that Drew Brees had that year. And for these numbers to be as similarly as they were, call it what it is. 2021, you head over to the Denver Broncos, where they drafted Javonte Williams from North Carolina. They were a 2-headed monster. 918 yards from Melvin Gordon, 903 yards for Javonte Williams, respectfully. 8, and they had 12 combined touchdowns as a running back tandem. Cortland Sutton was back this year. 776 yards and 2 touchdowns. We know Teddy Bridgewater was there, but they did have a lot of help on the ground and could be close to the production that LaDainian Tomlinson put up on his own in 2003 if we're comparing year by year, right? LaDainian Tomlinson had 1,645 yards, 13 touchdowns to David Boston's 880 yards and 7 touchdowns at the receiver position. Wow, I know that was a lot to be said as far as statistics goes, but I'm glad you guys are still here with me. So let's get over to kind of the outlook of, within 6 years, Drew Brees went ahead and transitioned over to the Saints. And now we have Drew Lock that got traded to the Seahawks. So, and it's just his first 4 years of play. The team that Drew Brees went to that year in 2006 with the Saints, they were 10-6. They beat Philly in the divisional round of the playoffs. They lost against the Bears in the championship round of the playoffs. So they were not a team that you needed to scoff at. Marcus Colston was one of my favorite receivers at the time. He was a 1,000-yard receiver. Deuce McAllister was one of my favorite running backs at the time. He had 1,000 yards, and I believe this was the year that Reggie Bush was on the Saints as well. So, and I think he had about 500 yards. Will Smith was an awesome defensive lineman at the time. He was a Pro Bowler, and Drew Brees was a first-team All-Pro and a Pro Bowler that year. Jamal Brown was his left tackle at the time, and he was a first-team All-Pro and also made the Pro Bowl. So their team was pretty stacked that he went to, and I'm not saying that the Seahawks are the same thing, but I can make an argument that offense, they've made improvements by drafting Charles Cross on the offensive line and, picking up a couple other pieces in the draft. But the 2022 Seahawks team that Drew Lock is going to is not only has a 1,000-yard receiver the quiet assassin, as I like to call him, and Tyler Lockett. But they have DK Metcalf, who had 967 yards last year, and everybody's infatuated with this guy. Rashad Penny came in for Chris Carson and had 749 yards in 10 games. So, you know, if you can look at that however you want to. There's nothing to scoff at. And when Chris Carson is healthy, he can be one of the best running backs in the NFL. I think he could be a top 15, if not a top 10 back when he's healthy. So you also have that working with you, and they're going to bring that piece back to the puzzle. And then, of course, just like the Saints had Sean Payton at head coach, the Seahawks have Pete Carroll at coach. So kind of some interesting things that we're seeing here. Not saying that Drew Lock is going to a stacked team like the Saints, but he has enough weapons around him to make him look possibly even better than when he was with the Broncos. And, you know, last year was kind of a fluky year with Teddy Bridgewater and things like that, and they did have a really good 1-2 punch at running back. So here's the things that concern Drew Lock right here. 18 touchdowns and 17 interceptions in his last 16 starts. That was from 2020 to 2021, which gave him a 4-12 record at quarterback. Again, I'm all about it, saying that it is a team sport, and we got to kind of look at it as always being a team sport. 4-12 record, yes, and quarterback is a very important position on the field, but the 2000 Ravens won a Super Bowl with Trent Dilfer at quarterback. Take that how you want it. So one of the most interesting things as I've done my research is to talk about this one situation, and that's protection rate by your offensive line. Remember how we were alluding to that their offensive line has not been good? We know that Drew Lock has accuracy issues, and that's his one thing, right? We already addressed this in the 50%, completion percentage. But his protection rate since 2019 to 2021 has been a 79.3%. You would hope your offensive line gives you, some protection, at least at this level of the NFL. We're not saying that this guy's Lamar Jackson by any means, but, any quarterback would struggle with that. So 2019, it was 81%. 2020, it was 78.8%, and this year was the worst year when he was playing quarterback at an 82.5% when he did have to come in the game and throw the football. I mean, take it as how you want to. I think this kind of gives just a different perspective on what Drew Lock had to deal with Denver. Say what you want, they didn't have any consistent coaches there. Obviously that's a huge issue and a huge risk to any type of quarterback development. But he's going to a team where Pete Carroll's going to be his coach, and I think he's going to put him in the right position. He already had the success with Russell, already had to make the tough decision when they drafted him to, for him to be the starter. And now you ran into another situation where you are bringing in a veteran back like Geno Smith, and you're bringing in Drew Lock to have an open quarterback competition. So Pete Carroll's going to go with the right guy. I hope they give Drew Lock at least one more chance. I don't think you're looking at a Sam Darnold type of situation here. I think his accuracy issues can improve. So hopefully that's one thing that he's worked on in the offseason. For Paul Andrew Lock, nothing but success for you, my man. I've been a big fan of yours since you've been at Missouri, but taking my biases out of it, I still think we can give this guy one more chance on a better team, on a system that's going to cater around his strengths. And mechanically, he has some things to work on, but I think when we're using the eye test, it could be a little deceiving versus what the numbers were. And compare it to a first ballot Hall of Famer in Drew Brees. Drew Brees struggled early in his career too. So, and we've seen that leaf get turned, and he was 6 years into his career with amazing weapons on his team. I know we didn't get a lot into the defensive side of the ball and what they've done. If we're just measuring what the offenses have done at this point in time, Drew Lock's career is very eerily similar to Drew Brees' career in his first 3 years. Thanks guys for rocking out with me. If you have not, please go ahead and hit that subscribe and that like button if you do like the content. If you don't, well, thanks for watching anyways. We will be live. We are live every Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. We do have a new guest, not a new guest, but it's his permanent home with us. Coach Dante from the Spotlight Sports Network is our official third member on the East Coast Gridiron podcast, so please go and check his content out as well. I will put the link in the description. Again, I'll start making more videos like this in the future. It just takes a while. I like to do my research and I like to vet everything out. So this has been Dante for the East Coast Gridiron podcast. Thanks for hanging out with me on the handoff, and I'll catch you guys later.